All right. So, which disease is caused by a fungal infection? And so, the other ones are caused by things like viruses. Athlete's foot is the only one that is caused by a fungal infection. And how pandemics different than epidemics? Well, recall we talked about the fact that pandemics have to cover a bigger area, and an epidemic is more localized. So, B, pandemics affect more countries or states, and an epidemic is more localized. And which is one possible human benefit from biotechnology research? Well, that would be A, producing crops that can grow in areas where they normally do not grow. So remember, biotechnology is all about improving what we have, but specifically looking at ways that medicine and pharmaceuticals can grow and improve life on Earth in general. So that is what we mean when we talk about biotechnology, improving medicine, improving um, pharmaceuticals, improving any sort of agriculture, things like that. So, how has genetic engineering helped farming? So, remember, when we talk about genetic engineering, we're talking about changing the genetics of fruits and vegetables. We talk about changing them or improving them in some way. And so, here, we're talking about helping the farmers, and this would be by creating crops that resist some disease. And so, again, if they can become more resistant to disease, then that means they can last longer, and that they are able to withstand certain diseases and they don't die, which means they can be sold, they can be eaten. In some environments, wolves prey on deer for their source of food. If all of the wolves were taken from the environment, what would most likely happen to the deer population? Well, if the deer are the ones eating, or excuse me, the wolves are the ones eating the deer, then what would happen to the deer population if the wolves were taken? The deer population would increase and begin to compete for food, right? So if the wolves are removed, then of course, then that opens up the lane for the deer to now kind of have a free for all, because now there's nothing kind of coming after them to eat them. So they're going to definitely increase in population. And 16, how are mutualism and parasitism different? Both organisms benefit in mutualism, whereas in parasitism, only one organism benefits at the other's expense. So, mutualism, think about it that way. When you talk about something being mutual, you talk about both organisms benefiting, both organisms getting something out of it. Whereas when we talk about something being a parasite or parasitism, we talk about the fact that one organism is a parasite, one organism is a host, and the organism that's a parasite is the one that is using the organism that is the host. So, what would have the greatest long term impact on reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air? So, when we talk about reducing carbon dioxide, we talk about something that's going to kind of act like a sponge to the carbon dioxide that is floating around in the air. And planting trees around a farm is going to be your best bet, because remember, plants as a whole, they need carbon dioxide. So, planting something there, those trees are going to act like a sponge. They're going to soak up that carbon dioxide. B wouldn't be the answer. That's the opposite. Cutting down trees is going to make it worse. Increasing the number of livestock is going to make it worse, because they're going to put more there. Decreasing the number of livestock could potentially decrease the amount of carbon dioxide, but planting trees is going to be an even better option. Which evidence supports the idea that life on Earth has continually evolved? You can look at things like rock layers and fossils and ice cores. This gives you evidence of previous life as well, so you can compare it to the current life status here. Which would most likely increase the genetic variation in a population of organisms? So, most likely is the important word there. So, an increase in mutations, right? So, not all mutations are bad. And if the more mutations that happen, the greater chance of genetic variation. Now, that's not to say that all genetic variation is going to be good, but the more genetic variation, the more that there's mutations in the DNA, the greater of a chance that there is more genetic variety, because the DNA has been changed, has been altered over time. And so you are going to get a different combination the more you go on. So, which is the primary source of energy for most cells in the body? And we say a sugar. Now, remember, when we talk about sugar, we're talking about glucose. So, I know the answer there says sugar. And yes, that is true. However, when we say sugar there, we're meaning glucose, right? Remember, glucose is another word for sugar. And all of our cells need glucose, right? So glucose is what they're meaning there. So glucose is another word for sugar. And which is classified as an element, and that would be iron. It's the only one you could find on the periodic table. And so which best describes the sequence of the elements in period 5 of the periodic table? And so when you look at the periodic table, if you go to period 5 on the periodic table, you would see that they are highly reactive metals, relatively non reactive metals, metalloids, reactive nonmetals, non reactive gases. And so, again, here I'll insert a picture of the periodic table just so that you guys can see um, a picture of where all of those are located, just so you can reference back to that as a study tool. So I would count down horizontally, starting at 1. So go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and starting at rubidium. That's where period 5 starts. Starting at rubidium and working your way across. Starting at rubidium and ending at xenon. There, that's where you should be. That's the row that it's talking about. The period that it's talking about.